out on a piece of paper in your process of goal setting. So when we are talking about generating verb specificity about your goal, it would look like the following. So let's say I want to, quote unquote, get more fit, or learn conversational French, or anything for that matter, gardening. Maybe I want to build a gazebo in the backyard or a deck in the backyard. The key thing to answer is, what is the major block of action that's going to be involved in pursuing that goal? So for instance, if you want to get more fit and you're going to do that primarily through running and weight training, or swimming and weight training, you would want to get very specific in defining that priority goal as, I'm going to run X number of miles per week, or I'm going to go to the gym 3 times per week to lift weights. Although I would recommend getting even more specific than that. I would recommend that you literally write down, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times per week for a minimum of 60 minutes, where 50 minutes of that are carrying out hard work, okay, with of course rest between sets, etc. Or I'm going to attend 3 classes per week, or perhaps even just 1 class per week of learning conversational French, plus I'm going to spend 2 hours per week of practicing, say, word problems or mathematical problems. Whatever it is, you want to define first the priority, then you want to define the verb action that represents the bulk of effort towards that priority. So running in the case of the person who wants to get fit by running, weightlifting in the case of the person that wants to get fit by weightlifting, though of course I highly recommend people do both resistance training and cardiovascular training if indeed they want to be truly fit. Or in the case of language learning, or learning how to code, or gardening, or something of that sort, to really define the verb actions involved, and then to place specificity in terms of the amount of time that one is going to try to achieve each week in pursuit of that specific priority goal. Now, I realize that process itself takes a bit of time, but when you look back on the 100-year plus scientific literature of what leads to successful goal setting and pursuit, you find over and over again that those 2 components we've been talking about, specificity and measurability, are paramount. You just simply cannot discard those from the process if you expect yourself to achieve your goals. So whether or not it's the ABC method, or it's the SMART method, or the SMARTER method, again, all acronyms coined not by me, but by others previous to this conversation, you're going to find elements of specificity and measurability showing up again and again. So these are key features of any protocol that you are going to use in order to try and set and achieve your goals. And I should mention that setting specific goals and clearly defining the verbs that you are going to engage in to pursue those goals, and defining how long you are going to try and engage in those verbs each week to achieve those goals, has significant impact on the probability of success. We're not talking about a minor effect. In fact, in the original episode I did about goal setting and pursuit, I talked about the so-called recycling study. I'm not going to describe it in a lot of detail right now, but essentially this study looked at motivating people to recycle more recyclable products in the workplace. And what they found was that when people were told what the specific goal was and what specific actions they needed to engage in were, and how much of a given batch of refuse, so say, after lunch, there's some boxes, there's some forks, etc., some napkins, how much of that refuse they were going to try to put into the recycle versus the trash, it led to a greater than doubling of successful achievement of that goal. Now, that's a perhaps trivial goal to some of you, although let's face it, recycling is important. But that result has been shown again and again and again for different domains of goal setting and pursuit. So this thing of setting specificity, really spending time with it on paper, setting specificity of action, so which specific actions, and then setting specificity of how long you are going to engage in each of those actions each week, greatly increases the probability that you will achieve that what previously seemed to be a all too lofty goal. Earlier, I mentioned that during the course of today's episode, we were going to dispel some common myths about goal setting and pursuit. So now I'd like to mention 2 popular myths about goal setting and pursuit. The first one is that if we set a Post-it, a little Post-it sticky where you write down what you're trying to achieve and you put that on the refrigerator, or you put that on your mirror, that it increases the probability that you are going to stick to your goal. Turns out that is not the case. And the reason for that is that your visual system adapts to whatever is regular in your environment. Doesn't matter whether or not that environment is sparse, so it only has a few things in it, or whether or not it is dense, like a forest. Anything that shows up regularly in our visual environment gets canceled out. This is actually a basic feature of the way your visual system is wired. So for those of you that are taking a sticky note or a magnet or a sign and putting it on your mirror and leaving it there from day to day, maybe that says, run 60 minutes today or study French 20 minutes or whatever the goal happens to be. If you leave it there day to day to day, it actually diminishes the likelihood of progress. I know that seems kind of hard to believe, but it's true. Instead, a better approach is to continually write that thing out each day and put up a new sticky, put it in a new place, perhaps on the refrigerator, sometimes in the kitchen, maybe on the windshield of your car, although of course remove that while you're driving, etc. If you are going to incorporate visual reminders in your goal setting and goal pursuit process, you want to change those each and every day. This is actually something that perhaps app developers will start to incorporate, because I think the notifications that come through on various apps designed to remind us to do certain things can be helpful, but there too, we tend to attenuate to them, and we simply either do not notice them or we start to swipe them away over time. So visual reminders can be very effective. If you want to use them, great. You certainly don't have to. But if you're going to use them, you want to update them every single day. Otherwise, your visual system and certainly the areas of your brain that are associated with assessing novelty and emotionality will simply start to cancel those away. So the first common myth that we're dispelling is what I call the post-it fallacy. The idea that if you write something down on a post-it and you post it in an area that you frequent every morning or every day or every night, that you stand a higher probability of adhering to what is on that post-it. That is simply not true. You would want to replace it every day, and you would also be wise to move that post-it to different locations. The second myth is that if you want to increase your motivation toward pursuing a goal, and you want to increase the probability that you will achieve that goal, that you should engage in so-called accountability, meaning that you should tell people you are going to achieve that goal. Now, I realize that there are some prominent examples in pop culture of people posting something on social media and saying, in 3 years, I'm going to be, playing in Wembley Stadium, or in 2 years, watch, I'm going to be at the top level of my game, whatever that game happens to be. Sure, there are examples of that. And those are beautiful and inspiring examples. However, the scientific data tell us that if we inform people around us that, for instance, we are going to write a book, or that we're going to start a podcast, or that we are going to run a marathon, or whatever it happens to be, more often than not, we get feedback that is generally positive in form. I think that's good and to be expected, frankly. If a friend tells us, hey, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to pursue a new fitness goal, or I'm going to learn a language, we say, great, go for it. You can totally do it. You're very likely to succeed. Go for it. How do you want me to support you? Is there anything I can do to support you? Those all are, frankly, healthy exchanges. And yet the data tell us that the positive feedback that we get from others when we announce that we're going after a goal activate certain reward systems and motivation systems within our brain that then quickly dissipate and then diminish the probability that we'll engage in the type of behaviors that actually lead us to achieve that goal. So we have the post-it fallacy, and we have the myth of accountability fallacy within the context of goal pursuit. I, of course, am not saying that accountability is bad. To the contrary, accountability is a great thing, both to ourselves and to others. It's something that we should all cultivate throughout life. I'm merely talking about the myth of accountability in the context of goal pursuit, and I'm actually being more specific than that. I'm saying don't tell people that you're going to go out and achieve something prior to initiating action toward that goal, because in fact, the positive feedback that we get will diminish the probability that we will continually pursue that goal in a way that allows us to achieve it. So you could interpret the information I just gave you as meaning that perhaps it's better to tell someone who doubts us that we're going to achieve a goal. And then, of course, they're not going to give us the positive feedback. We're not going to get all that reward circuitry activated. Rather, we're going to get the friction circuitry activated of us wanting to prove ourselves and overcome the, let's just say, the lack of faith in our ability to achieve a goal. And indeed, that can work. There is evidence that can work. But Then, of course, you have to find someone who doesn't believe in you. You have to get them to tell you they don't believe in you. And that could have all sorts of deleterious psychological effects that might undermine the goal pursuit process and other things as well. So if you are lucky enough to know somebody who doubts you, go ahead, tell them that you want to pursue your specific priority goal. But more likely than not, the best thing to do is to simply keep that goal to yourself. You may need to inform a family member or others of where you will be between the hours of, say, 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. if you're going to be exercising or learning language or meditating, whatever it is during that period of time. But what I'm referring to here is what I will call the don't tell the world rule. Don't tell the world that you're going to achieve X, Y, or Z. Just simply tell yourself. In fact, I would suggest that the more time you can spend with that 1 or 2 or 3 sheets of paper where you defined the goal, the specific actions that you're going to take, how you're going to measure progress, which we'll talk about a bit more later, the more time that you can spend with that goal in your mind and on that paper, the higher the probability that you will achieve that goal. That stands in stark contrast to telling everyone around you that you're going to achieve a certain goal, the so-called accountability myth, or the myth of accountability within the context of goal pursuit would be the more specific way to describe that myth. Now, it turns out there is some utility to having one person that is a so-called accountability buddy, if that person is really just strictly addressing accountability. They are reminding you to do what you need to do, or they are asking you, did you do what you said you were going to do? But that's a bit more of a tough love accountability model. What the don't tell the world rule is really about is not getting the kind of dopamine and other forms of neurochemical reward that come from just simply saying that you're going to pursue a goal, because as you'll soon learn, that dopamine and other molecules too, of course, are going to be critically important, not just for initiating the sorts of actions required to achieve your goals, but for re-engaging and constantly updating your strategy to ensure that you reach your goals. It's worth mentioning that the friction model of achieving your goals does work. I mean, I, for instance, am somebody that if I were to say to a family member or friend, hey, I'm going to achieve a particular goal, and they said, no, there's no way you can do it, that would recruit a certain set of neural circuits and hormones and neurochemicals in me that would make me much more likely to lean into the required set of efforts to achieve that goal. But there's a danger in approaching a given goal that way, especially if the goal is something that you already want to pursue, which is that then a lot of your effort becomes framed in the context of making someone else wrong as opposed to achieving the goal. And of course, you can do two things in parallel. You can achieve your goal and prove somebody else wrong. But as we've talked about in various episodes on motivation and pursuit and the dopamine system, and as we'll talk about a bit more in a few minutes, there's something tremendously powerful about learning how to derive pleasure from the effort process itself. That is, learning to enjoy the process of pursuing a goal for sake of that goal for yourself, rather than trying to pursue a goal simply to prove somebody else wrong. I'll just tell you right now that intrinsic motivation that is directly attached to the thing that you are doing en route to a goal, is the most powerful and sustainable source of motivation. As many of you know, I've been taking AG1 daily since 2012, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. AG1 is a vitamin mineral probiotic drink that's designed to meet all of your foundational nutrition needs. Now, of course, I try to get enough servings of vitamins and minerals through whole food sources that include vegetables and fruits every day, but oftentimes I simply can't get enough servings. But with AG1, I'm sure to get enough vitamins and minerals and the probiotics that I need, and it also contains adaptogens to help buffer stress. Simply put, I always feel better when I take AG1. I have more focus and energy, and I sleep better, and it also happens to taste great. For all these reasons, whenever I'm asked, if you could take just one supplement, what would it be? I answer AG1. If you'd like to try AG1, go to drinkag1.com/Huberman to claim a special offer. They'll give you 5 free travel packs plus a year's supply of vitamin D3K2. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Huberman. The final protocol related to goal setting, because really up until now we've been talking only about goal setting, we haven't yet talked about goal pursuit, is that you want your goal to be measurable. And when we say measurable, you really have to define two things. First of all, you are going to have to define how long you are going to pursue this goal overall. In other words, how long you think it will take before you achieve your goal. And in addition to that, you are going to have to define how much time you are going to spend pursuing that goal each week or each day. Now, there are an infinite number of time blocks that one could use to answer these questions. So for instance, you could set an overall yearly goal and you could break it down into monthly goals where you spend X amount of time on that goal each week and X amount of time on that goal each day, and essentially ladder up from the shortest time frame to the longest time frame required to achieve that goal. And certainly all of that is doable, but that I believe is going to be an overwhelming amount of work and indeed is going to be counterproductive toward achieving your goal. What I recommend, which of course is gleaned from the scientific literature, or at least the consistencies or the center of mass, that is the major findings that show up again and again in the scientific literature on goal setting and pursuit, is that you establish a roughly 12-week period of time to focus on your specific goal. Now, of course, achieving the entire goal might take longer than 12 weeks, but chances are it's not going to take shorter than 12 weeks, although if it does, you could simply close out that goal pursuit and then pursue another goal. There's no reason you couldn't do that. But there's nothing magical about this 12-week period, but it seems to adhere to a number of things in society, in culture, in work schedules, in seasonality, meaning the holidays and the shifts in the overall seasons, that works for most goals and most people. So a 12-week cycle, or roughly a 3-month cycle, sometimes called the quarterly cycle, of goal pursuit toward your particular goal, I think is a good macro time to focus on. And then within that 12-week cycle, to define very clearly how many hours each week and each day, and on which days you will pursue that goal. Okay, so it's 12-week cycle to pursue your goal. That goal might be achieved by the end of that 12 weeks, or even prior, it might not be. But you set a 12-week cycle or quarterly cycle, or if you prefer to think about it, a 3-month cycle, and then you define how many hours per week you are going to spend pursuing that goal. And then you define how many hours per day you are going to spend pursuing that goal. And then you define which days of the week you are going to pursue that particular goal. I think those three numbers, the 12-week quarterly, aka 3-month cycle, the number of hours per week, and the number of hours per day and particular days that you're going to spend working on a goal, is going to be effective for 90%, if not more, of different types of goals out there. And as with defining the specific goal itself, I highly recommend that you write this down with a pen or pencil. There's just so much data to support the fact that writing things down, ideally in complete sentences on a piece of paper with a pen or pencil, serves to reinforce the goal setting and pursuit process, greatly increasing the probability that you will achieve those goals. So what you're really defining in that process are the specific verb actions that you are going to take and the specific quantifiable amount of time that you are engaging in those verb actions in order to achieve your goal. What we haven't discussed yet, however, is how to define or quantify the goal itself. Now, of course, in different endeavors, you're going to have the opportunity to quantify and define goal achievement in different ways. So for instance, if you want to be able to run a sub 6-minute mile or a sub 5-minute mile, or if you're really impressive, a sub 4-minute mile, well, that's a highly quantifiable goal that you can break down into a series of training steps or milestones, meaning that you could quantify at the beginning of your goal pursuit how long it takes you to run a mile. You could then set out to achieve a faster time within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then do the appropriate training to achieve those numbers and simply keep updating that in order to eventually reach your quantifiable goal at 12 weeks. Again, you might not complete your goal of running a sub 5-minute mile or sub 6-minute mile at the end of 12 weeks, but perhaps if your goal is to be able to run a sub 5-minute mile by the end of the calendar year, and you're initiating this whole goal pursuit thing on the first of the year, well, then you have 12 months broken into 4 3-month cycles. And you would essentially set the quantifiable goal at the end of the year, December 31st, perhaps is when you actually do that run, where you hopefully would achieve that sub 6-minute or 5-minute mile, or maybe even 4-minute mile. And then you backtrack from that date and you set milestones of goals that you're trying to achieve. That's a highly quantifiable set of goals because it is literally distance over time. However, in a lot of pursuits, in fact, I would argue in most pursuits, you don't have that very clear quantifiable result. You might have, for instance, the achievement of a doctoral degree or a bachelor's degree or an AA degree or a professional degree of some sort, which represents a finish line. You could perhaps even attach a grade point average or a publication goal to that. But in most endeavors that aren't athletic or aren't within the realm of finance, it becomes much harder to very clearly define your goal in purely quantitative terms. So that is the reason why we spend so much time talking about the measurability of the specific amount of time that you're going to engage in the verb actions that each day, which days, each week, over the course of these 12-week cycles, because ultimately what's going to allow you to arrive at successful achievement of your goal, regardless of whether or not that goal is highly quantifiable, X number of dollars, X number of minutes to complete a mile run or swim, etc. Or it's something that's a bit more nebulous in terms of quantifiability, like conversational French, right? There's conversational French that you can learn. There's also conversational French that incorporates humor, or that incorporates good humor, or perhaps you want to get better at writing poetry or simply spend time writing poetry. Can you quantify the quality of that poetry? Well, perhaps, if you could win a particular prize for poetry, but I think for most endeavors, they are more loosely defined in terms of their quantifiability. Now, we can always attach quantifiability to the ultimate end goal if we choose. So for instance, I could decide that I'm going to learn conversational French, and I could decide that the ultimate goal at the end of this 12-week period is to be able to have a 10-minute conversation with somebody who is fluent in French, they're native born in France, and that I'm going to make 0 mistakes. That's a pretty lofty goal, but the point being that if you are picking a goal that is not easily quantifiable, you want to be exceptionally precise about the amount of time that you are going to spend engaging in the specific verb actions that are going to allow you to make progress toward your goal. Because ultimately, whether or not it's a highly quantifiable goal or it's a more loosely quantifiable goal in terms of the end goal, the process of achieving goals is always going to be in the form of actions, and actions themselves are always quantifiable. It's number of hours of dedicated work toward that particular goal. A common example of an end goal that's very hard to quantify in terms of the end goal itself is the writing of a book, for instance. Now, you could set out to write an 800-page book, but most people agree that the length of the book should have something more or less to do with the content and not the other way around. In other words, that you don't just want to add words in order to achieve a certain number of pages. That said, most all experienced writers will tell you at least 2 things. They'll tell you, first, don't wait for inspiration. Simply set a period of time each day that you're going to write, and write X number of words or for X amount of time each day, or perhaps even just 3 days a week. But most of the experienced writers that I've spoken to write every single day, and they write 800 words per day or 2,000 words per day or 500 words per day, whatever they can do consistently. They may do it for time, they may do it for words, but they are writing during that time. They are not waiting for inspiration to land on them. They're not trying to get optimally caffeinated, and perhaps they didn't even sleep that well the night before. In other words, they are dedicated to engaging in a particular number of hours of word generating action, rather than trying to focus on getting the number 1 bestseller at the end after the book is published. Of course, they can wish for that number 1 position on the bestseller chart, but ultimately, the greatest probability of achieving that goal is going to come from engaging in a particular number of hours, generating a particular number of words each day. So again, the highest probability of achieving our goals, of achieving any kind of goal, is going to be by understanding the specific verb actions that we need to engage in, and then quantifying the amount of time that we engage in those specific word actions, and then simply doing those verbs. So up until now, we've been talking about goal setting, and we really haven't talked about goal pursuit itself. So now I'd like to talk about what the scientific literature says is the best protocol for initiating our goal pursuit, for starting toward our goal. And to do so, we have to address a set of key questions. The questions you have to ask yourself are, do I want to pursue this goal? Meaning, am I highly motivated to pursue this goal, or even mildly motivated to pursue this goal? Do I want to do the things involved to get this thing, to accomplish this thing? Or am I feeling resistance? Do I not want to pursue this goal? Or perhaps this is a day-to-day shift that occurs where some days you're really motivated and other days you are not. Now, the reason to ask yourself this set of questions is that the data say that there are 2 different strategies, in fact, 2 markedly different strategies that you'll want to incorporate depending on whether or not you're motivated or you are unmotivated to pursue that particular goal for whatever reason. And of course, there's an entire psychology to motivation, and you could get a therapist or a coach to work with in order to address that underlying psychology. Yes, it might ladder back to childhood issues. It might ladder back to esteem things. None of that can be covered here in any sort of meaningful depth because, frankly, we each have different circumstances, different pasts, different psychologies. There are, however, some universals that we can all apply in order to help us get started toward our goal. And this is nested in this whole concept of whether or not we should visualize the end and successful completion of our goal, so keep the end in mind as we start off toward a goal, or whether or not we should incorporate a different strategy. Here's how it goes. So if you ask yourself, do I want to achieve this goal? And I would hope the answer is yes, because the overall goal should be something that you want to pursue. It should be something that you are deeply desiring to accomplish. Then you have to ask yourself next, do I want to do the things required to achieve that goal? Now, maybe you don't want to do all of them. You only want to do some of them. But given that you've now carefully quantified which specific actions you're going to be doing on which days and for how many hours and how many weeks for these 12-week blocks, you could simply ask yourself, do I want to do this thing today? And if the answer is yes, well, then it turns out that spending just 1 to 3, maybe 5 minutes, but even just 1 minute, visualizing the outcome, the positive outcome, of course, and the feeling state that you may have, because of course you don't know, you don't have a time machine, you can't feel yourself into the future, but you can make a good guess as to how you might feel in the future if you accomplish that goal. Spending 1 to 3, maybe 5 minutes in a sort of meditation, although sort of a visualization is perhaps the better way to describe it, thinking about that feeling state and the outcome and some of the things that are going to be associated with that outcome turns out to be a great practice to engage in just prior to initiating that day's work toward that goal. However, if you arrive to your practice, meaning you show up to the piano to learn piano, or you're sitting down to the table, or maybe you haven't even gotten enough motivation to go toward the piano or toward your notebook or computer or whatever landscape it is that you are going to be pursuing your goal within, and you are having, quote unquote, a hard time getting motivated toward that goal, well, then it turns out, what the scientific literature tells us, is that visualizing the end, keeping the end in mind, positive visualization of all the good things that you'll experience when you achieve that goal is not going to be an effective strategy to motivate you. Rather, if you are not feeling motivated, then what the scientific literature tells us is that you actually want to spend 1 to 3, maybe 5 minutes visualizing failure, visualizing how terrible you will feel if you do not achieve your goal, visualizing severe consequences, perhaps mostly of the sort like telling yourself, gosh, I set a goal, I set a 12-week block, I quantify it, I know I want to do this, here I have the time to do it, and I'm simply just not doing it. And in that case, you would think, okay, well, you should kind of build yourself up, maybe call a friend, text a friend, get some encouragement. No. The scientific literature tells us that when we are not motivated, and it is a goal that we actually want to pursue, and of course here I'm talking about adaptive goal pursuit, meaning things that are going to enrich your mental health, physical health, etc., not things that are going to be detrimental to us. Well then, if you're not feeling motivated, you want to spend 1 to 3, perhaps 5 minutes meditating, concentrating on what it's going to feel like to fail, and the fact that you are not succeeding, but indeed that you are failing. And I know this sounds like rather harsh advice, that this protocol sounds like kind of a self-flagellating protocol. It's not intended to be self-flagellation. In fact, it should not be self-flagellation, but rather what you want to do when you are not motivated is to think about failure and what that failure at the end of 12 weeks will feel like. And the reason for that is that the data tell us that when we visualize positive outcomes, yes, it deploys certain neurochemicals in our brain and body that make us feel good. Although, frankly, if you've heard that imagining something creates the same neurochemical and neural circuit states in the brain as actually experiencing that thing, that is simply not true. That's a myth. We've talked about this in previous episodes. That's simply not true. But if you are having a hard time getting motivated toward a goal that you actually want to achieve, then spending that short amount of time thinking about how lousy you'll feel when you don't achieve it recruits certain elements of your so-called autonomic nervous system. It creates shifts in the release of things like epinephrine, norepinephrine, even release of the so-called reward molecule, dopamine, which in fact is not the molecule of reward. It is the molecule of motivation, and it's associated with pain. It's associated with negative thoughts, and of course, it's associated with positive thoughts and outcomes. But basically what I'm saying is, if you're highly motivated to do something, you're ready to go, spend 1 to 3 minutes, maybe 5, visualizing the positive outcomes that you're going to experience when you ultimately finish out that 12-week cycle as a consequence of all the great work that you've done. If, however, you are not motivated, you're feeling like, I don't want to do this thing, I'm procrastinating, I'm just not feeling like doing it. Yes, I want to achieve the goal, but I just don't feel like doing it. Well, then your task is to take 1 to 3, maybe 5 minutes and think about how much more lousy you will feel when you do not achieve that goal at the end of 12 weeks. And that, the data tell us, recruits certain elements of your nervous system, your hormonal system, that are more successful in getting you into action, into starting toward your goal, than were you to try and build yourself up towards all that positivity. So yes, indeed, there is a place for negative thinking. I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you meet your health goals. I'm a big believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. However, with a lot of blood tests out there, you get information back about blood lipids, about hormones, and so on, but you don't know what to do with that information. With Inside Tracker, they have a personalized platform that makes it very easy to understand your data, that is, to understand what those lipids, what those hormone levels, etc. mean, and behavioral, supplement, nutrition, and other protocols to adjust those numbers to bring them into the ranges that are ideal for your immediate and long-term health. Inside Tracker's ultimate plan now includes measures of both ApoB and of insulin, which are key indicators of cardiovascular health and energy regulation. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you can visit insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off any of Inside Tracker's plans. Again, that's insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off. Now, in terms of tools or protocols to both initiate and to sustain effort during your goal pursuit process, we need to think about the specific time domain or the amount of time that we're trying to do that within. So, for instance, there are tools that you can use to stay motivated within the 1-hour learning block that you happen to be doing on Monday morning, for instance. And there are other tools and protocols that you can incorporate towards staying motivated from one day to the next or from 1 week to the next. But I think the most useful of those tools are going to be the tools that you incorporate to stay motivated within a given training block or practice block toward your goal. Because what I just described a few minutes ago was the process of how to initiate your daily work, right? You ask yourself that question, am I motivated? The answer could be yes, could be no. If you really want to get quantitative about it, you could give yourself a 1 to 10 score, 10 being the most motivated. Frankly, I'm not that quantitative about that sort of thing. I'm more subjective about it, but I know some of you are real number junkies and you really like to quantify everything, keep a journal and look back, see how that relates to your sleep. Some people are of that orientation. Other people like myself are simply going to, sit down and say, okay, it's time to train or it's time to practice, whatever the thing may be. How motivated am I? Am I like a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10? Okay, I'm ready to go. I'm going to visualize the end in mind in a positive way. Or if I'm a 2 out of 10 or anything less than a 4 out of 10, I'm thinking I'm not that motivated. So then I'm going to basically scare myself into doing the work that day. So that's how you initiate the work each day. And I just gave you a couple of quick examples of how you could quantify that. It took me about 30 seconds to do that example out loud. It would take you about 30 seconds to do. But again, if you want to quantify it in more detail and write it down and relate it to other things, be my guest. So now you already have a science-based protocol for how to get started each day toward your goal. Now, what about within the 1 or 2 hour block or perhaps 90-minute block that you're going to use to pursue your goal? And here, it's very important that you have a number of tools that will allow you to both set the optimal amount of focus so that you're really concentrating on pursuing that goal. You're concentrated on the verb actions that will deliver you to that goal is perhaps the best way to state that. And that you can constantly update or renew your level of focus should it start to dissipate. Now, I want to be clear, I've done entire episodes about focus and how to increase focus with behavioral tools, everything related to meditation, which indeed can increase your ability to focus. I've talked about nutritional tools, supplementation tools, prescription drug related tools. There's a lot of information on that. You can simply go to hubermanlab.com, put focus into the search function, and it will take you to not only those episodes and the toolkit for that, but the specific timestamps for that. But what we are going to talk about now is not about how to increase focus per se. Rather, it's about how to use focus, in particular visual focus, in order to increase your or maintain your level of motivation within a given learning block, within a given batch of time on a given day where you are pursuing your goal. You're engaging in that practice, which of course will include frustration, anxiety. It has to, if you're going to get any better. And how to set that motivation and keep that motivation throughout that hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours is critical. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out it's fairly straightforward. So it's anchored in the fact that your cognitive focus, your ability to maintain a narrow cone of attention, as well as your bodily state of readiness and your mental state of readiness to perform work, is powerfully anchored to your visual system. As many of you have heard me say before, your eyes are actually two pieces of brain. I mean, to be more specific, the neural retinas that line the back of your eyes, like pie crusts, are literally two pieces of your central nervous system of your brain that were extruded from the cranial vault during development. So yes, these two bits, and for those listening, I'm just pointing to my eyes. Your eyes are two pieces of brain outside of your skull, and your eyes can view things broadly. So you can so-called soften your gaze and view the entire horizon. You can see the periphery of the room by relaxing your eyes. You can actually do this now. In fact, when you drive, most of the time you're doing this. You're not looking at a particular focal point. You're viewing things in so-called panoramic vision. And of course, you can draw your visual focus to a particular location, what we call a vergence eye movement. That is, you're bringing your eyes in toward the center, toward your nose a little bit, and you're focusing them in a more narrow cone of visual attention. This is something you can do almost imperceptibly to others, although if we were to measure your eye movements, what we would see is that your eyes are actually moving inward a little bit toward your nose when you do this vergence eye movement and narrowing that cone of visual attention, and then they're relaxing into a state of being slightly further out from your nose. Not the eyes themselves, of course, they can't move within the sockets, but the pupils of your eyes are moving out a bit from your nose, and you're in so-called panoramic vision. So essentially what I'm saying is that you can narrow or broaden your visual attention, and that's something that can take a little bit of practice. I highly recommend that you try this and that you practice it a little bit. But indeed, everyone has the neural machinery to do this from birth. This is not something that requires neuroplasticity to be able to do. You can do this right now. You can narrow your visual attention, you can expand or relax your visual attention, and thereby narrow or relax your visual field from being smaller or larger. There are data that show that when we narrow our visual attention and we hold that narrow visual attention on a spot, several things happen. First of all, there's recruitment of circuitry within the so-called brainstem that then deploys neurochemicals that increase our level of alertness and arousal. That's right. When you focus your visual attention on a more narrow location or one location in front of you, and you hold that focus, you are causing the release of neurochemicals that increase your overall level of alertness in the brain and body. Conversely, when you relax your visual focus, so-called panoramic vision, you are turning off that recruitment. You're not actively recruiting molecules for relaxation within the brain, but you are turning off this release of the neurochemicals associated with increasing focus and arousal. So why am I talking about this in the context of goal pursuit? Well, if you are feeling lack of motivation at any point within a given training block or bout, as I'm calling it, this could be at the beginning, this could be 5 minutes in, this could be half an hour in, you would be wise to pick a visual target. Ideally, a visual target that is within the general range of the work that you're trying to perform. In other words, if you're doing desk work with a piece of paper, you would draw that visual target on a piece of paper approximately the same distance that you were reading or that you were looking at music. You can tell how little playing a piano I've done in my life. But the point being that you set the visual target at approximately the same distance that you would be performing your particular work. So if you're doing a sport, the distance might be some many meters off in the distance. Whereas if you're doing desk work of some kind, then it might be much closer. And then you focus your eyes on that location and you actively work to maintain that focus, just like I'm doing now, into the camera for a given period of time. And I recommend that you set a timer and that you, of course, allow yourself to blink like I just did there, and that you try and achieve at least 30 seconds, but even better would be 60 seconds. Even better would be 90 seconds of that focused Virgin's eye movement, during which several things happen, including the deployment of those neurochemicals from the brainstem that I talked about before, which are going to increase your level of autonomic arousal and also increase your level of focus further. And there I'm not just talking about visual focus, I'm talking about cognitive focus. It has also been shown that when we focus on a particular point in the way that I'm describing here, that it increases our so-called systolic blood pressure. As many of you know, blood pressure is always described to us as a given number over another number. And the first number is the so-called systole or systolic pressure, which is the amount of pressure in your vascular system when the heart beats, as the fluid of your blood is pumping through the arteries, veins, and capillaries of your system. And then the bottom number is the amount of pressure within those arteries, veins, and capillaries in between heartbeats. So it's the systolic over the diastolic. And what we know is that visual focus, and here I'm still holding mine now on the camera, so for those of you listening, I probably blinked once or twice, but I'm really trying hard to maintain my focus directly within the camera. This visual focus increases the systolic blood pressure. It increases the deployment of those neurochemicals from the brainstem, and we know it also can recruit the liberation of molecules such as dopamine and some associated molecules elsewhere in the brain that together act in a synergistic way to increase our level of focus and motivation. This is based, again, on work describing the neural circuitry of what I'm describing here, and work from Emily Balcetis' lab, which has shown that if people focus on a target, on a goal line, literally a physical location within their environment, and then they initiate some work, it could be physical work or cognitive work, not only do they experience significantly decreased levels of perceived effort while engaging in that work, but they also complete that work in a significant